Welcome to Apothecary After Dark, the official podcast of Amityville Apothecary.
This is what real witches talk about when the doors are locked, the lights are low, and the incense is still smoldering.
From spell work and shadow work to hot takes on hexes, healing, and everything in between, we're serving up magic, mystery, and a little bit of mischief.
So pour a cup of your favorite libation, light that protection candle, and settle in. It's about to get witchy. Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of Season 4 of Apothecary After Dark, Amityville Apothecary's official podcast, and what we talk about when we pull down the shade and lock the door and kick out all the customers. I am here with my best friend and partner in all things business and fun.
Yes, hi guys, I'm Danielle, and I am so, first of all, in disbelief that it's season 4. It's been a lot of fun, and we're glad to be back. And today we have a very special guest named Thumper Forge, who is the author of The Chaos Apple, which we will dive into, and a metaphysical master. So, Thumper, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this.
Can you tell our listeners and those watching on YouTube a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am, my name is Thumper Forge. I am a Gardnerian witch and an initiate of the Minoan Brotherhood, which is a kind of an offshoot of Gardnerian. I am a Discordian, which means that I am a devotee of Eris, the goddess of discord. And I am a lithomancer, which means I throw rocks on the ground to see the future.
Cool.
I love it.
He's going to show us what that looks like for anybody watching. So I'm excited to see that a little bit later. But
and some of you, if you're the TikTok kids, you might see Thumper over on TikTok throwing, elbows at the kids, saying all sorts of nonsense about all sorts of witchy topics. And, some of my favorite things are when they say that they hate Wicca for no reason.
I fight the good fight over there.
You really do. You really do. I'm like, oh, there's Thumper putting in the good fight.
Well, that's a juicy topic we could talk about for sure.
It's interesting because I think depending upon where you are generationally, because I think you, Danielle, and myself are all Gen Xers, right? You're a Gen Xer also?
Absolutely.
So, okay. So we're officially Gen X, which for us, we don't feel old, but for the other people that might be listening, they're like, you guys are ancient.
Maybe,
but for us, especially, I guess, because of the way we came up and because what the access was like when we were younger, not having the internet and maybe not having a bookstore like this to access books on craft. A lot of times, Wicca and witchcraft are conflated for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the younger kids are like, ah.
Well, it's, for a long time, the word Wicca really didn't kind of come into popular usage until like the early 1970s. Prior to that, everything that was kind of coming out of this one specific area of England was being called witchcraft. And when it was Stuart Farrar, who was an author who kind of introduced the word in his book, What Witches Do, and used it interchangeably with witchcraft. So for our generation, witchcraft and Wicca were just interchangeable words. And it really wasn't until like the late 2010s that people started really wanting to, that younger practitioners really wanted to see kind of a distinction between Wicca and witchcraft. If you're familiar with Mara Starling, who is kind of the epitome of Welsh witchcraft, and she's amazing. She posted on one of her social media platforms recently where she's like, I think the word Wicca has become any witchcraft we don't like, we just label it Wicca and set it aside.
Yeah.
Which, as she was like, which is not really fair to Wicca because that's not what it is at all. But it's also why there is so much misinformation about it, is because people just sort of see it as like this catch-all negative term. And therefore all the misinformation about Wicca tends to contradict itself.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's interesting. What you outline in this book, which I thought was really helpful, is you actually detail some significant practitioners
Yes.
historically, so creators of chaos, and you
Yes.
detail a little bit of like who they are and what their contributions were, including Carrie Thornley, who was the first person to use the word pagan in reference to the modern practice of pre-Christian religions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is a helpful guide for people to dig deeper into different types of practices, as well as,
Exactly.
for people who might not be as well versed, the difference between witches versus magicians and high
Mm-hmm.
magic versus the term low magic. And right at the get-go, you debunk some of those. Can you just give a top level description in your own words for some of those terms?
Sure, absolutely. And the reason why I talk about this in the book, because so much of the book is about chaos magic, which itself is not always clearly understood. And for a long time, anyone who practiced chaos magic was a chaos magician. But really, starting around 2016, the term chaos witch started growing in popularity, without much of a distinction between what is a chaos witch and what is a chaos magician. So, as I see it, and kind of looking at historical precedents, a magician is someone who is practicing magic kind of within a societal structure, and who is working magic primarily for their own benefit. The example I always use, and I actually just gave a presentation about this over the weekend, so it's all fresh in my mind. If we think about like court astrologer in the Renaissance, right? Somebody who is working magic, but for the court, for an employer, and is, if they are dabbling in anything, it's going to be ceremonial magic, and it's going to be all about connecting themselves with the divine. It's not about doing much to benefit anybody else. Whereas a witch is practicing magic on the outskirts of society. If you think of like the village hut with the wise woman in it, and they're working magic for their own benefit, but also to influence the world around them. So it could be, the cunning folk who help with the local birthings, as well as, I saw Goody Proctor's spirit jump on my cow and sour the milk. It's they're having more of an influence on the world around them, not just doing things for themselves.
That's helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting because we had been talking to Cherry Para, who wrote.
Yeah, she's Mexican.
She's from Mexico. The Left-Hand Path of Tarot,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about left-hand path versus right-hand path, and I'm like, well, really, if you think of it, a lot of times when you come to tarot, you're left hand because it's really about yourself and what you're looking to understand about your own relationship and your own, what's happening at work and am I getting a promotion? So it's, it's interesting about just the way we even use language and how it sort of misaligns really what it is that we're doing.
Yeah. And left-hand path, the term left-hand path is another one that seems to be growing in popularity again. Mm-hmm. And I think the perception is that it means like dark and edgy and evil. But it really just has to do with being self-centered, which in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It is just, focusing on yourself and kind of making yourself the center of your universe, where right-hand path is more the generosity and the giving and helping others, which, could also be done for evil. So like for me, right. I try to avoid a lot of binary thinking, and just kind of, because there's so much nuance to everything, even down to left-hand path and right-hand path. The way somebody could approach those, could be radically different than everybody else. There is not one way to accomplish goals on either of those paths or on any path around or in between them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the term chaos witch is growing in popularity, but I think it's also becoming nebulous, that it's used as a catch-all for so many different things. So how would you describe chaos witch, being that you have a book about it? Whoops, as my page holders fly everywhere chaotically.
Well, I think
very appropriately.
The term Chaos Witch got very popular before anybody had a definition for it. Where the first person to use the term that I'm aware of is a practitioner named Kellyanne Maddox, who lives in England, who is just a modern expert on chaos magic in general. But she used the term witch because she felt that magician has always been sort of a male-coded word, whereas witch tends to be more gender neutral and more in line with just how she practices and why she practices. Getting back to that idea of the witches doing stuff not only to affect themselves, but affect the world around them. So a chaos witch is, in my mind, is a witch who is practicing magic using a chaos magical theory approach, because chaos magic really is an approach to magic versus a form of magic unto itself. Because the phrase got very popular, in no small part because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the Scarlet Witch and her powers being explained as chaos magic. I don't think people really fully understood the term or had a good grasp of what that meant. And then it got very popular. So what a lot of people define now as chaos witchcraft or being a chaos witch, they're really talking about eclectic witchcraft, which is fine. Eclectic witchcraft is great. All witchcraft is, on some level, fairly eclectic. But the approach to magic between those two is very different. And so one thing I tried to do with the book, and just when I do presentations and when I'm on podcasts, is try to make people aware that chaos witchcraft is its own specific thing, not just a new way of saying eclectic.
Yeah, I think that's a great differentiation. So what are some of the pillars of this type of practice that differentiate it from the others?
The main thing for me is that within eclectic witchcraft, practice is assembled around belief. Like if I want to practice witchcraft, I'm going to read a bunch of books on paganism and kind of, figure out what that means to me and which gods I might want to venerate and which spirits I might want to develop relationships with, and then start assembling a practice that is going to reflect those beliefs. Chaos magic itself, one of the kind of the fundamentals is the idea of using belief as a tool. That is, switching one's belief based on what one is trying to accomplish, or just believing whatever I need to believe in order to get my magic to work. So for chaos witchcraft, belief is assembled around practice. I'm going to figure out what I want to do, and then figure out how I'm going to approach this or what worldview I'm going to take. The big example, when I said that I was presenting, I was at Austin Witch Fest this past weekend, and I used the example of an old spell that comes out of a book of Irish folklore from the 1800s. And it's a spell to turn invisible. And it involves very esoteric ingredients, and then an incantation involving a prayer to Satan. And you pray to Satan, and then you turn it, and then after you do all this other stuff, you turn invisible. And I explained that, we could put a lot of effort into reconciling this incantation with our own beliefs. And it's a spell to turn invisible. So maybe we're going to invoke Hades because he's associated with invisibility. And the spell involves growing beans and putting the beans in your mouth. And okay, that's Persephone, right? That's a vegetation goddess so we can rewrite a poem to Hades and Persephone. And then we don't have to worry about the Satan stuff, which we may not be comfortable with, especially those of us who are Gen X and grew up Satanic Panic and, practical magic, no devil in the craft. Yeah. So I could put a lot of effort into rewriting this one little piece so that I'm comfortable that I'm comfortable in my beliefs. Or I could just recite the invocation as is and just pray to Satan for 5 seconds. And that's where let me just let Satan into my heart for a few seconds, say the prayer. If I turn invisible, great. Noted, if I don't turn invisible, then I might go back and start rewriting stuff. But I'm going to, set aside any preconceived notions about theistic Satanism for less than a minute just to see if the spell works.
I love it. This is very much
how you operate.
It's very much what I do.
I do it to a certain extent, but that's very.
But as far and people are always like, "What's your belief system? What are your deities?" I'm like, "Don't have that."
Yeah.
It's not. It's what has to get done. What's the and then
what's the end goal?
Right. What are we doing? So and then it changes, but it's so interesting because it's like, for me, and I don't even know, but like for me, the approach was always my craft was always like how I cooked. So if I wanted to have a certain taste, I wouldn't keep using only the herbs that were in like Italian American cuisine, because then the food would keep tasting the same.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, and that is very much a chaos approach. Is altering things to suit whatever we're trying to accomplish. And the chaos in chaos magic, I think people tend to think chaotic and think all over the place and messy and undisciplined. But the chaos comes from the Greek word chaos, which is, in Greek mythology, chaos is what existed before everything else did. And it was like the primordial intelligence that gave birth to the rest of creation. So when the pioneers of chaos magic started talking about chaos magic, they saw that as like potential and possibility. And, we can do anything with this, and we can take this in any direction. So that's the chaos they were referencing. Yeah. And the pioneers were very disciplined with what they were doing and very experiment driven and doing stuff just to see if it worked. And if it worked, doing it again to see if they could get repeatable results out of it.
Yeah, I love it, because when a lot of times when we're talking to either in classes here at the shop or, explaining to, people in the shop, like about if they're buying something, they're trying to do a spell, I always say, like, be a scientist of your own experience and your emotion counts. Like, this is your experiment and you're the scientist, but the parameters of how you judge it can be your emotion. It can be your feeling. It could be on vibe. You would set it. But when I say that to people, they're like, oh my God, I could look at this as a science experiment. So it's when I was reading your book, I was like totally like, oh, that's so interesting.
Totally.
Yeah.
And personal experience, I think, is a kind of a key to chaos magic in general, where if I read something in a book, whether it's my book or anybody's book, I can take their word that it works, or I can try it to see if it works. And if it doesn't work for me, that doesn't mean it doesn't work at all. It just means I'm going to have to come at it from a different angle to see results.
Yeah.
And like when you mentioned
totally
cooking,
operate that way.
I'm a terrible cook in real life, but I have a cookbook called A Man, a Can, a Plan. It was these very simple recipes. And when I first started trying to make them, I was following them like step by step, measuring, doing everything they said, and they just never quite worked. But I started figuring out that if I add, one extra egg, then the pancakes stay together, or whatever it was. Or if I, just chop up a chicken breast instead of using a canned chunk chicken, then the flavor is better, or it cooks more evenly. But it was all about me just trying things and figuring out how they were going to work for me, versus just making the recipes that were clearly had worked for somebody because they ended up in the book. But, I wasn't going to sit around and eat terrible food and be like, look at me, look what a good cook I am. I had to fix it to make it so that I could actually do it.
Yeah. And that's like working out of a spell book.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's
right. You have to tweak
similar.
it so it's personal to you. Like, I might be inclined to start working with some of the Celtic deities because that taps into my heritage. But if a spell is calling for different Greek pantheons that I'm not as familiar with, I'm like, okay, but what's a similar energy? What's a similar purpose? What's a similar correspondence? And then I'll pull in aspects that are personalized to me. So it's the same concept and the same goal, but it's personalized, and it'll be much more effective to me because ultimately it's me conducting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You conducting it for you.
Correct.
I think also sometimes it's kind of for me and with chaos magic is kind of looking beyond the written instructions and looking at not only the how, but the why, and just not accepting everything on the page, just on faith. And that's the spell I was talking about, the invisibility spell. The reason why it makes such a good example for me is that one of the components is a raven's heart. You have to get a raven's heart, and you get a black hafted knife and you cut slits in it and you put black beans in the raven's heart and then you plant it. And when it grows, then you eat the beans and invoke Satan and turn invisible. And I could put a lot of effort into actually tracking down a raven's heart, right? Like they're probably available somewhere. But without too much research, I can also determine that a heart is a muscle, and when muscle decomposes, it releases calcium and phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen, all of which are found in potting soil. So the heart is not there because it's a heart. It's there because it provides nutrients for the plant I'm growing. And
I went straight to, or you could just go to like the supermarket that has the chicken hearts.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing. If we're doing this invisibility spell and everything in the spell is black, it's the black bird's heart and the black bean and the black handled knife. And so, you could also just, get the heart of a black hen, or just realize that it's not the heart itself it's as important as the chemicals that it's going to release. Which, knowing that, makes the spell a whole lot easier to accomplish.
True.
Two different approaches to one needed, alternative. So that's a perfect example for sure. I have so many questions I want to talk about. Like, we don't have that much time, but this book is chock full of fascination things. You touch on sigils, you touch on demons. Like, we don't have that much time, but what do you say about demons?
The demons it's a very kind of irreverent approach to demons, because a lot of the book is about Discordianism, which is this parody religion that was founded in the early 1960s that people started taking seriously. And it's this religion devoted to the goddess Eris. And Carrie Thornley, who you mentioned earlier, who was one of the founders of Discordianism. And at some point in the 80s, he got together with a cartoonist and wrote a Discordian grimoire for demons. But it was like the demons who, in his mind, demons were what kind of caused us problems in daily life. So there was like a demon of consumerism and a demon of inflation and a demon of televangelism. But he also mentioned the Azazel. One of the demons was Azazel, who guards the exit to reality. So in order to kind of see the world for what it is and be able to view the world objectively, we basically have to learn how to bribe Azazel by being weird and being Discordian to seek his approval so that he will let us see the world more clearly and objectively. And for me, I thought that was really cool. And I don't know that Carrie Thornley meant to include the name of an actual biblical fallen angel. But it's a way that Discordianism kind of can bleed into other disciplines. So, demonology can have a Discordian aspect to it and have a fun, irreverent aspect to it.
That's pretty cool. Thank you. Well, I recommend everybody get the Chaos Apple and to follow you on your socials. So before we do our collective pull, and I'm going to ask you to cast the stones, how can people find you?
I am pretty much everywhere at Fivefold Law. That's my handle on Threads and Blue Sky and Instagram and TikTok. I am behind on TikTok because I had to go out of town, so I've got to crank out a whole bunch more videos, but I'm still there. I also blog for Patheos Pagan, and the blog itself is called Fivefold Law. And then my main website is thumperforge.com, and so you can find links to everything there.
Cool.
Where I know you were just at a conference, but what do you have coming up this summer? Anything that people should know about?
Yeah, I will be at an event in August in Connecticut called Harvest Gathering. Cool. And I'll be doing at least 3 workshops and helping run a ritual up there.
Oh, so just a few things. Okay.
Yeah, just kind of phoning it in. But no, I just was at Austin Witch Fest, and then I'll be kind of in my cave for a couple of months, and then I will be flying up to Connecticut for that.
Cool. Now, during the day, you're in a shop, and we were talking before we got started about the people that come into shops that sometimes you're like, are they actually real people? Mm-hmm. Or is something else happening? So I had an experience as I was walking out before, but I was wondering if you have a fun experience you could share with us of the people that you encounter in the shop?
Most of my customers are, they give off fairly human vibes, even if they're not the most, sometimes they're differently sane human, but they are human. But there was one guy, maybe about a year ago, this guy walked in and he was in a business suit and he had a backpack, a huge backpack. And he walked up to the front counter and I said, "Hi, what can I help you find today?" And he just stood there smiling at me, not blinking, and started playing air piano along with the overhead music. And he just did that for a while, and then he smiled and left. And I was like, "I'm glad I didn't give you my name or get into a binding contract because
Yes.
I don't think you were from my normal plane of existence."
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, that happens. Oh my goodness.
Weird.
Yeah, no, that I'm telling you, there was just a lady outside, and she asked me about my holiday.
You never know.
And I was like, "Oh, how was your holiday?"
Yeah. Well, it makes the day interesting, right?
It does.
So our tradition of pulling cards is going to be a little different today because I have a deck, Tarot of the Abyss, which I love, by Anna Terrain. It's a very cool deck, black and white, and the descriptions are cool and the interpretations are cool. It's so funny. Underlying is the Wise One, but I wanted to pull from the top, which is Queen of Swords. So I guess both wanted to be shown today.
I am pulling from my deck, Crystal Keys Tarot. So let's see what we get.
And Thumper, are you going to throw stones or are you going to use Lenormand?
I'm going to use stones, and I don't know if the camera can see this. I've got a handful of semi-precious stones. Some of these represent the classical planets, and some of them represent kind of personal areas of life and concern. And then one stone is our indicator, which will tell us like what the most pressing matter is or what's the crux of our current situation. And I will sort of disappear off camera to throw them on the ground, and then I'll tell you what they say.
Okay, of course. So I got the Ace of Swords, which in my deck is paired with Amethyst. So let's see what you get with your stones.
All right.
Okay. Let's see. What I got, the most pressing situation for this reading, the indicator landed right next to our stone Life. Life represents kind of the greater environment. It is milestones. It is, births, deaths, weddings, divorces. So kind of big life changes, usually representing things that we don't always have control of. That things that kind of happen to us versus the things that we are trying to make happen. It's not a negative stone by any means. It just means that things might be going on that we personally don't have any say over.
It's interesting paired with the fact that we both got swords, because a lot of times swords are, seen as those quote unquote unpreferred archetypes where people are like, oh, I don't.
Well, it's challenging and blunt and can be cutting sometimes.
Yeah.
Well,
it's just what happens. So I think, maybe the message here is you really have to sort of temper your emotions and try and stay as close to the objective truth as you can when you're faced with these circumstances in life that happen that you might not have a lot of control over.
Yeah. And just kind of the old prayer of the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can. And focus more on what we can change.
I love the serenity prayer. I have that on a bracelet of mine that I wear usually every day. But the Wise One is the Hierophant in this deck, and it's an indigenous chief sitting around a fire. And I just think that's like give it up to God, right? Like there's certain things that are in our control, and the Queen of Swords is our birth card, and I think yes, there's a lot of thoughts going on. People are like, what's happening right now? But
listen, there's a lot going on everywhere that we can't control. We can only sort of, sometimes the board on which our life game is played is shifting underneath us, and we still have to play our game.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
Give it up to the big guy. I have faith it's all going to work out. It's, it always does. We've made it this far.
Well, Thumper, thank you so much for hanging out with us. You are so cool. Keep fighting the good fight on the social media with the kids.
I absolutely will.
I will be there cheering you on with bullseyes and all of the little emojis.
This
in
is
your
super
comments.
fun. I had super fun.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really, really enjoyed this.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, stay in touch and we'll have you back for more fun, maybe in person at the shop soon.
Awesome.
That sounds great. I would love it.
All right, guys.
Thank you so much for watching us. Make sure you follow us across all the socials at Amityville Apothecary. Share with your friends and please comment. What did you love? Did you learn something new? Who do you hope we talk to next? And we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye. That's all for tonight, witches, but the magic doesn't stop here.
Be sure to follow Apothecary After Dark wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Leave us a comment or review. We'd love to hear what's stirring in your cauldron.
And you can always find us at shopamityvilleapothecary.com or at Amityville Apothecary across all the socials.
Until next time, keep your wards up, your wands at the ready, and your spell work sharp.